To grow your business, you must become the CEO your future business needs. You have to grow the capacity that your business needs as CEO before you get there. And I realized that my leadership journey was less about learning how to be a CEO, and it was actually a matter of unlearning in order to be positioned to be an effective CEO for my company. So I'm super excited to be here with you all. My name is Dr. Erica Jordan Thomas, and today we're gonna have a leadership conversation. Is that all right with y'all? We talking about people, we talking about teams, we talking about how to be a great CEO that everyone wants to work for and no one wants to leave. And so Brandy shared a little bit about me and who I am, and I felt it was important to start here of what qualifies me to have this conversation, because I don't teach what I haven't done. So I'm CEO and founder of EJT Education Group, where we help Black educators grow seven-figure education consulting businesses and become millionaires, because I believe that teaching is one of the most patriotic acts in this country. And if anybody deserves to be a millionaire, it's an educator. And that's what we help them do. I'm a former high school math teacher. I believe we all are math people. And if you are a CEO, you need to be a math person, because you need to read your P&L. I'm also a former school principal, and fun fact, I know folks are like, oh, she was a principal, her skin, she look kind of young. I was an assistant principal at 25. I became a principal at 28. And so I have actually been managing and leading people since I was 24 years old. And the school that I led, we had 1,000 middle school kids. And so when people think about the role of the principal, they think, oh, kids. I'm like, no, my job was the adults. I had to lead and manage a staff of 115 people. So I actually had 5 secretaries. Like, we're just talking about secretaries, right? We're not talking about how many teachers. There's also child nutrition staff. There's custodial staff. We have paraprofessionals. So I had a staff of 115. I left the principalship and went back to school full-time and got my doctorate in education leadership. So I spent 3 years formally studying the art of leadership. So there was a small time where I thought I was gonna be a superintendent, and my path shifted to entrepreneurship. And today am a full-time entrepreneur. I have a team of 6, 4 of them are full-time employees, and I'm absolutely obsessed with leadership. So what I bring to you today is the practical experience of leading people, as well as my academic experience of actually studying leadership. So today we're gonna blend the 2 experiences because I'm sure there's lots of experiences each of you are bringing, and you're like, well, why did that happen? Let me make sense of that. So I'm gonna be sharing with you experiences as well as pairing them with actual leadership frameworks, so that way we can better make sense of leadership. And I wanna start with a little framing. I wanna set expectations, because oftentimes when we come to these types of learning spaces, we think, I wanna get a strategy that I could take back and implement tomorrow. And I'm not gonna be able to meet that expectation for you, because many of us are trying to change our leadership actions when actually it's first your leadership beliefs and values that influence your thoughts that then influence your actions. So if you are trying to change your leadership actions, we actually need to interrogate your leadership beliefs and values. So that's the conversation that we're gonna have today. So I cannot promise you're gonna leave with something you can do tomorrow, but I am gonna promise that you're gonna be able to think differently and be more aware around who you are as a leader to set you up to adopt different leadership actions. So what that means is today, I'm focused on building your leadership toolbox versus building your leadership muscle. So I'm promising that by the time you leave, your toolbox will have a few more tools in it to inform and influence how you decide to lead. So being the educator that I am, I got objectives. Do I got any teachers, whether former teachers, current teachers? Sound off. Sound off, you my people. All right. So y'all know about some objectives. We're going backwards plan from these objectives. This is what we should be able to do by the end of our time together. Is we're gonna be able to identify 3, how many? 3 areas of unlearning that y'all know what I say when I mean we must engage in to be positioned as an effective CEO. We're also gonna unpack 3, how many? 3 leadership concepts to add to your leadership toolbox and build your leadership muscle. So this is how I'm gonna do this, and my educators are gonna appreciate this. I'm essentially gonna do 3 mini lessons where I share with you a story. I'm gonna name the unlearning that I personally had to go through and then share with you the leadership framework to help make sense of it. So because I'm gonna be sharing stories and experiences, I wanna give you context to my team, my current present day team, so that way we can make sense of all of this. So meet my team. They're not actually in the room, but we act like they are. Show my team some love. Because I wanna be very clear that there is no EJT education group without them. They are the machine that allows our company to run, and I'm extremely grateful for what they do each and every day for our company. And some of you might notice something, right? And I named the fact that my team happens to be all Black women. It wasn't necessarily intentional, however, I don't believe it's a coincidence, right? Because we attract who we are, right? So I share this because when I transitioned into full-time entrepreneurship, I began to realize all my ways of working. And ways of working is how an individual, they work with each other, they communicate and make decisions with the team. So when I went from being a full-time employee to now I'm running my business, I began to see all of my ways of working that were unconscious for me for so long. And you can also think of ways of working like rules. What are the rules that we were taught that we had to follow in order to be successful? And one of them was you work 9 to 5. So I realized all of a sudden when I became a full-time entrepreneur, I was trying to work 9 to 5. And the first time I went to go get my nails done at 2 o'clock, I was like feeling a little weird. I was like looking around like, and I was like, who's gonna check me? Like, who's gonna check me? Right? Like, I'm the boss, right? And so that's an example of a ways of working or rules of working. What time you arrive, what time you leave, what time you take lunch. Even now, I'm usually eating lunch either earlier or later because for so long as a principal, we had our very first lunch at 10 a.m., right? Or our last lunch at 1:30. So recognizing all of these ways of working. But here is the catch. Most organizations and systems were not created for Black women. So if I'm coming into my company and business with rules that were not created for Black women, I am very tempted to recreate the rules that I know. However, I am likely to be creating a company that is not safe for my team. Because the last thing I want to do is recreate the system I left, right? So I actually now have to go through this process of seeing what are all the rules that I was following and who made that rule? Do I still want to follow that rule? What was the purpose of that rule? And I realized that my leadership journey was less about learning how to be a CEO, and it was actually a matter of unlearning. That there were some things that I actually had to unlearn in order to be positioned to be an effective CEO for my company. Because we have a mission and vision on our website around how we support Black educators in building wealth, but my goal that isn't necessarily written on the website is I'm trying to build a company that's safe for Black women. I'm trying to prove that excellence and rest can coexist, right? Which means I'm gonna have to unlearn a lot of rules in order to co-create what those rules would look like. So when I'm saying unlearning, I mean, we're making an effort to forget your usual way of doing things so that you can learn a new and sometimes better way. So today I'm gonna share with you 3 unlearnings that I had to go through in order to position me to be an effective CEO, and then the leadership concept or framework that helped me make that shift. So the first unlearning, I wanna start with sharing a little story. So this was my staff picture. That's me on the bottom right with the little like baby afro with the little blonde at the top, that's me. And I was a principal of the same school I was an assistant principal, so I was promoted into being a principal. With that within itself is an interesting leadership dynamic when you're promoted within. right? So I ain't got time to go into that, but that is an interesting leadership context and a unique one. But my very, very first year being an assistant principal, I was the leader. I really didn't care about your weekend. I'm like, what's your data say? Like, where we at with this goal? Like, I mean, you could tell me about your weekend, but for real, my next question is about to be, okay, so what's your lesson tomorrow, right? Where I know my leadership DNA is I have more of a bias towards data and goals and not as much towards relationships. And the very first year of leading, it was very clear that that's how my leadership DNA was wired. So much so that my team made it really clear that that wasn't gonna work. And we had an all-staff email situation where you were supposed to be responding just to me, but you decided to reply all. So now, when you publicly respond, now I gotta publicly address, right? So that for me was one of the greatest leadership lessons that I learned, is that, and we say this in education, if you don't feed the adults, they will eat the kids. Right? Where my goals don't matter because the reality was I was not the one teaching in a classroom. Right? So my first target client was not the child, it was actually my teachers. It was actually my staff. So I was operating originally from this belief that people will do things because I said so, because it's the right thing to do. Because if I said it, I mean, obviously I'm saying it for a reason. And if I'm saying something, I'm not gonna say something that's bad for kids. Right? So you should just be able to execute. And what I had to unlearn and shift to was actually this belief that people do things to minimize threat or maximize rewards. We as people, every single decision we make, whether conscious or unconscious, we are trying to protect ourselves. We will pick naturally something that will keep us safe. If something seems unsafe, we will try to avoid. So as a leader, I had to know this and get really clear on what causes people to feel unsafe. So I want to introduce our first leadership framework, which is called SCARF threats. So this framework says that there's 5 types of threats, primary threats that are driving individuals. The first one is status, and SCARF is actually an acronym. So the first threat is a status threat. And a SCARF threat is basically your relative importance to other people, so how you're perceived. So the people who like, is there VIP? Because I ain't waiting in a line. Or it's like, oh, one of my rules is if it's over 3 hours, I gotta be in first class. The people who get to the airport early, not just because it's Atlanta, but you wanna sit in the lounge. You got a little status threat, which is, listen, we're not placing value on it if it's good or bad. It is what it is, right? But you need to know it because you could activate it as a threat, but on the converse, you could also play into it and incentivize or reward. So folks who have a status threat, they love to be publicly recognized. And they're probably the ones to be like, you ain't gotta say nothing. Like, you ain't gotta say nah, you ain't. But let you give them a certificate. Next thing you know, it's on their LinkedIn profile, right? So it works both ways. It can trigger a threat, but you can also use it as a reward to incentivize folks. The second one is a certainty threat. This is our ability to predict the future. So folks with a certainty threat, they live and die by their calendar. They the folks that when you schedule a meeting, they like, where's the agenda? How are we gonna spend our time? Or they need to know the marketing calendar for the year. You should have a marketing calendar for the year. However, for certainty threat folks, they like, I need to clearly see everything so that way I can plan accordingly. Ooh, I got a certainty section over here. People's like, right, yes, right. Okay, we see you. Which means that if they don't have details, they feel a threat. Secondly, we have autonomy threat. This is a sense of control over events. Now, I ain't got research to back this up. However, my strong hypothesis is most creatives have an autonomy threat. Because they like, this my art. Don't control me and my art. Let me do my thing. It'll be ready when it's ready. You can't rush the process. Right? But I'm like, but I need my video by this day. So, because I know you've got this autonomy threat, when we sign this contract, you're gonna put in that contract when this video need to be delivered, as well as the second round of edits, right? So again, autonomy, it could be a threat, or you could leverage it as a reward. Relatedness, how safe we feel with others. These are my empaths. These are my folks. Raise your hand if you've ever taken Strength Finders. Okay, so Strength Finders is like a leadership assessment. It gives you, there's 34, inventory of 34 strengths, and it'll rank these strengths for you. People who have harmony in their top 5 typically have a relatedness threat. They have a work bestie. They know everybody's personal life because they be in conversations with everybody, right? And they the ones that if you walk past them and you was thinking about something, but you ain't speak, that's a problem. Oh, well, they was thinking, I think we got some beef. I was like, I was actually just thinking about where I'm going. But I was actually just thinking about my next meeting. It wasn't like that, but just to clarify. But you need to know this about your people, right? So imagine if someone has a relatedness threat and you decide to take them as a treat one-on-one for dinner, as an incentive. And then lastly, we got fairness. How we perceive the exchanges between people to be. So fairness folks likely do not enjoy watching the news because their threat becomes activated because the moment they witness any type of inequity or injustice, it's a threat. But on the converse of it, these are people who deeply value transparency. So if you tap me and involve me in the process of making this policy, I understand the process. So don't decide and announce the new compensation model. Let's co-create it together. Or even if you slid me to the side and was like, yo, I'm thinking about rolling this out. Here's where my thought process is. What do you think? And you pull them to the side, right? So again, they work both ways. So if you notice, the first letter of each of these spells scarf, like a scarf you wear around your neck. So this model is called scarf threats. So because I'm an educator at my core, we're gonna do a little practice. Is that all right? All right. So I'm gonna share with you 3 quick scenarios. I'll read you the scenario, and then I'll give you 10 seconds to identify what scarf threat might that activate. Okay? So because I'm an educator, I'm gonna give real clear, effective directions. I will read you the scenario, I will give you 10 seconds, and then I will count down to go. When I say go, you just yell it out. All right? Okay, so here's the first scenario. The first scenario is an operations team member resigns the week before launch. Which scarf threat might this activate? Think about it. And when I count down, you will yell it out. Somebody right now feels a little triggered. It's all right. We family. We family. All right, and when I count down and say go, I want you to yell it out. 1, 2, 3, go. Okay. Okay. So if you know this is a certainty threat, as a leader, the moment they resign, you start crafting communication around what the game plan is. Right? Because how do you reduce the threat? People just need a plan. So if they was setting up the page, if they was scheduling the email sequences, be proactive and just name, this person is leaving, but also here's the new owners of task. Because now you've reduced the threat. All right, let's go to the second example. You've decided to roll out a time tracking software in response to increased incidents and false time being reported. Think about it, silent solo 10 seconds. And 1, 2, 3, go. Okay, I heard a few things. I heard autonomy. Who said something other than autonomy? Relatedness? Oh, fairness. Oh, fairness. That's a good one. Again, so knowing the threat may not change your decision. It just changes how you communicate. So if you know what the threat is, address the threat in your communication when you say your decision. Right? Because somebody's going to be like, oh, so now you all up in my business. Now you're trying to micromanage. Right? If you name in your decision, we have had multiple incidents of individuals falsely reporting their time, and as a result, we're losing profits. And because it's deeply important to me to be a profitable company, because when we're a profitable company, I can pay you all well and pay you even more, which is one of my goals, we're rolling out this time tracking software. And I understand it might feel like I'm attempting to control your time, but that is so far from the case, right? Address the threat in your communication. All right, the last one. You decide to move your team to remote working to reduce office expenses. Silent solo, 10 seconds. And 1, 2, 3, go. Somebody said fairness, I heard relatedness. Let me tell you what comes to mind for me is some people say certainty. What comes to mind for me is the people who now had the work wife, the work husband, the work BFF, now you ain't gonna see each other no more. So now all of a sudden, your whole perspective of work changes because you don't get to see your work BFF, work husband, or work wife no more. Y'all don't get to kiki in the lunchroom no more. So now, even though you could be doing great and nothing else has changed in your day-to-day, but because you don't get to see that work bestie, all of a sudden your complete perspective or your satisfaction at work has changed. So if you know that, plan for it. We might now decide we're gonna have monthly company happy hours because that's our opportunity to still cultivate and build relationships because we don't see each other day to day. So many leaders create issues because they don't plan for these types of things, right? They plan for the revenue and the profit, but they don't plan for the culture. And this helps you plan for the culture. All right, so here's my reflective question to you. Again, I'm in my educator bag. Listen, can't nobody say I ain't a good teacher, okay? Reflective question. What is your primary threat? Because you have one, and you need to know it. Because as a CEO, your threat will be triggered. However, you cannot lead from a trigger. So you need to know very clearly what your threat is, and you also need to list out every single person on their team, and you need to know what their primary threat is. Because you need to know that to influence your communication, but it's also a way to incentivize and reward people. Right? People are rewarded by different things. You can almost think of this is like work-love languages. Right? You could be doing stuff and someone doesn't feel value, and you're like, but I did all these things when really they just wanted more autonomy. It's like, oh, I could have gave you that. All right. So this second unlearning that I want to share with you, the way I want to frame it up is a clip from a show that I loved. Scandal. Do I get any Scandal fans in the building? Oh, we in the right room. Let me tell you, that Greg's Anatomy, Scandal, and How to Get Away with Murder Night. Oh, phone was on Do Not Disturb. I am unavailable, okay? So, Scandal, for those who you're like, I don't know what that is. It was a show about Olivia Pope, played by Kerry Washington, who was basically the fixer in the White House. There was a bunch of other stuff that was going on, but that's kind of the synopsis. So there was one particular clip that when it hit, Black Twitter went crazy. They went crazy because it was a cultural nuance that is very specific to being Black. And it was on ABC. So I'm getting ready to show you this clip. It's just a 30-second clip, and let me set context up quickly. Olivia Pope, played by Kerry Washington, she is in an entanglement with the president, who is married. They have decided they are gonna run off together to Vermont, to a house in Vermont. So she pulls up to the private jet, getting ready to meet the president so they can run off to their house in Vermont, and up pulls this black limo. And out of the limo steps her daddy. Let's watch the clip.
Did I not raise you for better? How many times have I told you you have to be what? You have to be what?
Twice.
What?
Twice as good.
Twice as good as them to get half of what they have.
Somebody in here was like, was that old boy who Whitley left at the altar? Like, it was. And he grew up and he led now a secret organization. Like, so he grew up. And when this clip dropped, Black Twitter went crazy, right? Because Black people are not a monolith, and we all kind of grew up in the same house, right? Because raise your hand if you grew up being told you got to work twice as hard, okay? So I share this because I was told that growing up. My mama grew up in Lexington, Mississippi, which is a small town of 2,000 people. She graduated from Jackson State University. Come on, Jackson State. Okay, Tigers. And so I named that because my mother has had to master survival tactics in order to survive, right? And her loving me and having my best interests, like she is now passing down those survival tactics to me, was you need to work twice as hard. And I did. It served me very well, right? It's not a coincidence that I was an assistant principal at 25, I was a principal at 28, I went to Harvard and got this doctorate. Like, that's not a coincidence. However, I have to recognize when that no longer serves me. Because here is the back end of working twice as hard, is it breeds perfectionism, right? And for those of us that are familiar with white supremacy culture, that is a tenet of white supremacy culture, is perfectionism. And when you're working in systems that were not created for you, you had to be perfect. And one of the things that I love that Bell Hooks named in one of her books that actually helped me do a lot of unlearning, Sisters of the Yam, she talks about how in order to survive in systems that were not created for you, you had to be perfect, which means that the oppressor had to live within you. Because before you were gonna get critiqued, you had to critique yourself, right? So she talks about the process of recognizing that perfectionism actually breeds the oppressor within you. So the unlearning that I had to go through is because when you are operating from a spirit of perfectionism, it actually breeds a really complicated relationship with failure. Very complicated. And again, I'm naming perfectionism as it is what it is because for me, it served me for a good time in my life. And now as an entrepreneur, it no longer serves me. So, because I don't have 90 days to make a sales page. People don't buy because of logos. They don't buy because of fonts, right? So I've had to do a lot of unlearning there. And one of those pieces of unlearning is I had to shift from you must work twice as hard and failure is not an option to actually realizing all failures aren't created equal. There's actually different types of failures. And a leadership concept that helps me really put wrap my mind around this idea that all failures aren't created equal is this framework by Amy Edmondson, who's a professor at Harvard Business School. She talks about the different types of failures. So she's actually created this spectrum of failures, and on one side, she calls blameworthy failures, and I'm actually gonna tweak the language and call this accountability-worthy failures, meaning when they happen, someone needs to be held accountable. And accountability looks differently. Accountability could be a conversation, accountability could be documentation, accountability could be a decision to transition. Accountability looks differently. So we're talking deviance, like you just ain't do something. And you, like, we've had this conversation over and over and over. I've clearly laid out how we're supposed to engage or the decision that's supposed to be made, and you just didn't make the decision. So now accountability needs to happen. Or lack of attention to detail of like, you didn't test the link in the email. So now an email just went out to the full email list with an offer, but the link don't work. And so part of our process that you test the link and you just didn't have an attention to detail because you were rushing. The inability category is one that names a lack of skills, training, or competence. And what's interesting, when I say accountability-worthy failures, the accountability may not always be the team member. There's some instances where actually it's you. So let me give you a quick example. One of my operations team, they build all of our pages internally. So we don't outsource funnels, we build them in-house. And we were doing a new launch. I delegated to my operations team member to build the page. I got it back and I realized, oh, this page is not set up to convert. Because there's actually an anatomy to a sales page of where you put the button, what goes above the fold, timers, where you put the offer. Like there's a whole anatomy to a sales page, and she just didn't know because I didn't tell her. So because I missed the step of actually teaching her how to build a sales page the correct way, we had to take a couple of extra days to rebuild it. I needed to be held accountable, not her. Right? So I named that because the accountability goes both ways. On the other side, we got praiseworthy failures. These are the failures we actually want to encourage. We want to encourage process complexity. Maybe you got an 8-step funnel, and if it broke down on step 2, that don't mean throw the whole thing away. It's fix step 2 and keep it moving. Or just uncertainty of something don't work because some wild event happens and you just couldn't predict it. So there's no one to hold accountable, whether it might be the weather or the sound went out, or who's ever had a webinar and your internet went out? So ain't nobody to hold accountable, maybe the internet company, but then it's, okay, we need to have a contingency plan, which means you might need to order a hotspot and put that on the P&L, right? There's nobody to hold accountable. And you wanna be hypothesis testing. Quick example here. We run ads, so paid traffic, and anytime we do ads to cold traffic, we would typically do $48, $49, and it worked really well for us. So I was like, well, let's try 98. See how it worked. It did not convert, like at all. So we're like day 2 or day 3, we was like, change that price. And then like keep running them ads. It was hypothesis testing, right? So these are the types of quote unquote failures that we want to encourage. And when you have when you're in a chokehold with perfectionism, you're gonna start holding people accountable for things that you should actually be praising. Because how else would we know? Like if we didn't actually do it, like how would I know that $98 ain't it with cold traffic, right? So I named this because this names the type of relationship you have to have with yourself as a leader, your actions and beliefs, because if you judge yourself for hypothesis testing, you're gonna judge your team, right? And one of the things my team member said that I knew was allowing us to make progress towards my goal of creating a company that's safe for Black women. She says, JT, I know that I can make a mistake without being a mistake. But what does that mean? How you gotta move as a leader for people not to feel like a mistake even when they make one. So here's your reflective question. What types of failures do you want to encourage amongst your team? And I'm going to add another one here. Now that you have this new information, what experiences were you treating as accountability-worthy failures that you actually need to give yourself grace for? Because you've been judging yourself, well, that webinar didn't work, that ad didn't convert, we didn't hit this goal. You were hypothesis testing, right? It's not like you weren't paying attention to details. It's not like you were deviant. You were hypothesis testing. You want to encourage and praise that. All right, our last one. To frame this up, can I share my revenue journey with y'all? Is that cool? Okay, so this year will be 7 years in business. I started my business while I was a principal. So that was in 2017. My first full year in business was in 2018. I made $33,000. Next year, $62,000, $147,000 in 2020. 2021, we crossed $500,000. 2022 was $1.08 million, and last year we made $1.85 million. So this ain't a part of my lesson on leadership. I'm gonna make a little side note. Because somebody looking at this and they like, okay, she did it in 6 years. So I'm on year 2, so I got 4 more years to go. Let me name that I did not get a coach until 2021. So had I got a coach in 2018, I could have probably did it in 3 years. Not probably, I could have. The other thing I think that's interesting about this revenue journey I want to use to kind of set up this last unlearning is I was in school full-time or working full-time for the first 4 years of my business. So all the way up to $500,000, 9 to 5, I was either in my office as a principal in a school or I was at Harvard. And oftentimes people will tell you, well, once you figure out what works, keep doing more of what works, which I think is true to a certain extent, but I had to do a little bit of shifting because I had this belief that to grow your business, you must find out what works and do more of it, and to grow your business, you must become the CEO your future business needs. So you not only got to do more of what works, you have to grow the capacity that your business needs as CEO before you get there. So if I want a 7-figure business, I got to be a 7-figure CEO today. What decisions would a 7-figure CEO make? You don't start becoming a 7-figure CEO when you get 7 figures. You start moving, thinking, and acting like one before you get there. That's what gets you there. Which means if you want a 7-figure business, you can't be satisfied with $98 investments anymore. Because that's not going to get you a 7-figure business. Free Facebook groups, advice in free Facebook groups is not what's going to get you a 7-figure business. And for real, that's not where I want advice from. Low-key? High-key? I don't want no advice from a free Facebook group, because first off, how you got the time to be giving out advice? Which means I can't relate. And secondly, if you got that time, we probably ain't got the same business or the same goal. So I named this because I realized that there were different leadership hats that I had to wear. And I want to share with you 3 types of leaders to create radical change, because what I realized as I listened to people get to the mic and name their business, and I think this is what's unique about Black entrepreneurship, we are driven by creating change. Whether it's change for our family, change for our community, change for our clients, we typically don't do something if it doesn't create some type of significant value or change for someone else. So there's 3 types of leaders, according to this study from Stanford, that are needed to create radical change. And I'm going to share these 3 types of leaders with you, and the examples I'm going to give you are actually 3 historical leaders from the Montgomery Bus Boycott. And I'm intentional about this because one of the things I had to recognize was, wait a minute, there's already a blueprint. What I'm trying to do has already been done before. I just need to go and find the blueprint. And I took a class on community organizing that broke down the Montgomery Bus Boycott. And I'm sitting there and I'm listening to this case study and I'm realizing, I'm like, all right, this in 1955, for 54 weeks, Black people boycotted the bus system and had to figure out still how to get to work, how to go get groceries, how to get to somebody's house. So I'm sitting there, I'm like, we invented Uber. Before the internet, before cell phones, before we invented Uber, right? So when we talk about that history and these three types of leaders, the first leader is an innovator. An innovator is somebody who anticipates roadblocks and comes up with alternative paths, and essentially they're a visionary. They can envision a reality that does not yet exist. And because they can envision a reality that does not yet exist, they can create the vision and state the vision. And a beautiful example of this is Joanne Robinson, who was the president of the Women's Political Council. The Montgomery Bus Boycott lasted 54 weeks, more than a year. However, the original plan was that it was just one day. And it was her idea. Secondly, we need an orchestrator. An orchestrator is now, all right, now that we got the vision, how do we execute and make this happen? They likely the one that pull up Google Sheets, they start making columns, they start listing all the tasks, assigning owners, i.e. they the project manager, like they just executing, right? They're the one that actually starts to create the roadmap for how we're gonna get this done. And a beautiful example of this was Georgia Gilmore. When the Montgomery Bus Boycott was happening, Black people were protesting and boycotting the bus system. We now had Black women who were serving in domestic positions for white families that were losing their jobs because it got found out that they were participating. Georgia Gilmore, who had the gift of cooking, decided to be the founder, and she decided to found an organization called the Club from Nowhere. And she employed these Black women. She is known as the woman who fed the civil rights movement. Because you had all these activists who were organizing in the background and they hungry, right? So when we talk about leadership and we talk about entrepreneurship, it's been here. And then the third and final type of leader is an agitator. An agitator essentially holds up a mirror. They draw attention to the problem because you can't fix what you don't see. So an agitator is the one who holds up a mirror and is like, here's the problem. Because there is a level, change is uncomfortable. Most people don't want to change. And the first step to change is creating a sense of urgency. An agitator creates a sense of urgency. They hold up the mirror and say, look at this, y'all smell this? It's a little funky in here. Nobody else smell that? And a beautiful example of this was Claudette Colvin. 9 months before Rosa Parks made the heroic, brave act to not give up her seat, Claudette Colvin did the same thing. 15 years old. And when she reflects back on that moment, she said, history would not allow me to get up. I had Harriet Tubman pushing down on one shoulder and Sojourner Truth pushing down on the other. Agitators, right? So I named this because you need all three. And in my journey, this may not be your journey, but in my journey, I had errors. So the first 4 years of my business, I was in my Innovator bag because I had to figure out how am I gonna make this money while I either got a full-time job or I'm in school full-time. So I had to innovate around my business model, and I got to $500,000. And then when I graduated and went full-time, now I gotta orchestrate, because I gotta build my systems, I gotta build my team, I gotta build my SOPs, I gotta build my processes, we gotta build our marketing strategy. And then I got into my agitator era. Once we crossed the 7-figure mark, because now we got 7-figure problems. And I'll take 7-figure problems over 3-figure, 4-figure, 5-figure, and 6-figure problems any day. And I'm ready for 8-figure problems, okay? But I named that because in order to grow, I now have realized I gotta start holding up a mirror. I gotta hold up the mirror to the vendor I had 3 years ago when my business was almost a fourth or a fifth of the size. And if you haven't grown your team at the same rate as mine, you're now a bottleneck, right? I've got to hold up the mirror to my own team who always accepts it and say that system or process that we built 2 years ago, we were at 500,000. Only 2 years ago, and now that system is breaking or it's wasting resources or human capital time. We have to stop and rebuild. So I share this so that way you can reflect on what role have you been playing? And what role will 2024 require for you? Some of you might need to agitate yourself. Because what I know, what my pastor has said is growth and comfort cannot occupy the same space. Right? So you might have to agitate yourself and do something that you have never done before in order to get to some place you haven't been. And you need all of these roles, so you might be thinking on your team, who's your orchestrator, who's your innovator, who's agitating, or that person who's getting on your nerves. You can now see that they've just been agitating, trying to get you to see something. Right? So, let's recap. We've had 3 unlearnings. People do things to minimize threats and rewards. All failures are not created equal. And lastly, to grow your business, you must become the CEO your future business needs. We've learned 3 leadership concepts: scarf threats, the types of failures, and then orchestrator, innovator, and agitator. So I know that I've named a number of resources and things that you're just like, can I just get that types of failure, like little screenshot? Just grab my slides. So if you scan that, it will take you to a page where you could grab my slides. And I would love to be connected to each and every one of you. And I will name this, because I'm on Instagram at @E_Jordan Thomas. I'm in the collaborative. I started in the mastermind. And then once I crossed the 7 figures, I moved to the collaborative. And I will name this particularly for any 7-figure businesses who are sitting in the room. We would love to have you in the collaborative. And you have the opportunity, because it's going to be tempting to be in the mastermind. And the mastermind is a great place, and it wasn't created for you. There's an opportunity for you to have access to more in the collaborative, and we would love to welcome you. So thank you all so much for the time, and I look forward to connecting and networking with you all.
Good joy.